Alrighty, we are going to talk about the ankle and the foot. A little bit about me. I'm Dr. Catherine. I am a doctor of chiropractic and I also hold my master's in sports medicine. I love all things rehab and I especially love kind of lower body injuries, hip, knee, ankle. I love kind of working on injuries that people have, but also injury prevention, getting people to feel stronger and better in their sport with a combination of rehab exercises, strength training, a little bit of plyometric, hands-on care, kind of that whole mixture. I have worked in the health and wellness space for about 12 years. And I have worked with kind of all ends of the spectrum of athletes, anywhere from your weekend warriors to kind of that Olympic level, and then also all sorts of different sports. I love CrossFit. CrossFit is the sport that I do. I love to compete in it just for fun, and have done a handful of different competitions throughout the state. So we're going to go over 4 different tests. Each test has a different component of what we're specifically testing, and we'll see kind of how it ties into the stuff we're going to go over. You can do this at home. You can grab a piece of paper or something to kind of write down what your score is as you go through each of these tests. So first off, we're going to go over a single leg balance, and we're going to time ourselves for how long that we can do that. We're first going to do it with our eyes open, and then we're going to do it with our eyes closed. What this is really testing is your foot strength. Once we take away the eyesight component, because our eyes rely a lot on as far as like telling us where we are in space. So what do you rely on when we take the visual component out, and how do you control that stability? Every time people close their eyes, they're going to fall out in one way or another. But how do you manage that balance? Also, are we like in a tilt the whole time as we're kind of holding that? Or are we nice and steady and upright as we're kind of balancing? Then we're going to go over a calf raise and how many can you do over a period of time before it starts to get really fatigued and tired. And kind of what is our foot doing as we are continually going up in this calf raise. We go basically until we feel fatigued or kind of crampy. And what this is measuring is how well our calf can endure that repetitive motion. What is our Achilles doing? What do we feel in our foot? Are we strong? Are we able to push up on our foot, or can we not really put a ton of pressure through there? And then we're going to go over dorsiflexion against the wall. So dorsiflexion is basically, if this is my foot, is my toes are coming up towards my shin. So the motion of my knee going over my foot, how well can I do that? How much range do I have? Or does it feel sticky, stuck, kind of sharp? It is really important as we are moving through different movements, whether it's squatting, jumping, walking, running, you name it. We kind of need that motion and flexibility to achieve those specific motions. And then a drop box test. So this is where we're going to start to tap our toes into a little bit of the plyometrics. It's basically dropping down off a box and seeing where you land or how you land. What is your foot doing? What is your knee doing? What is your hip doing? Are we able to maintain that foot position the whole time, or does it kind of falter as we land? Does our foot really drop in, and does our knee dive in as a result? Do we land really stiff, or are we able to absorb that force when we land? Kind of, this is a what do we feel, but also kind of what do we see? And with these tests, what I would encourage you to do is also, if you want to take a video of yourself and kind of see side to side, especially as a baseline before we go into some of these exercises, and then measure them after you spend some time on the exercises and see if they create a difference. They don't always create a difference, especially like I'm going to give it a try once and see what happens. Sometimes it takes some time. So if you have that video and do the exercises consistently for maybe like a month or two, and then go back and measure up against and see side to side that comparison. That's always kind of fun to see. All right, let's talk results. So the single leg balance, we want to at least have 10 seconds with good control, with both eyes open and closed. So 10 seconds being like we're in a good static position, we're not continually falling out and really having a hard time balancing. There are a few other kind of small components that we look for as far as like what would actually be a pass and a fail, but to keep it simple, we want a good control position for at least 10 seconds. And something to take note of is it easier or harder on one side? What do you feel differently between your right and your left side? And also, what do you feel differently with your eyes opened and closed? For the calf raises and being on that single leg, pushing up through your foot, how many reps can you get? We want to shoot for over 25 consistent reps that look similar. So if you're like barely getting that heel off the ground and you're at rep 24, that I would say you got 23 reps. What this is measuring is how well do you push through that foot, and how well is your calf able to maintain that strength throughout that position. And also kind of mentioned earlier, what is your, is there a strain on that Achilles? Is there strain on the bottom of the foot? What do we feel with this? Other things that I look for in clinic is also like, what is that heel doing as we're deviating away? Are we riding on the outside of the foot a little bit more? Or do we have even load among the foot underneath kind of that big toe and that little toe? So that dorsiflexion test where your knee is going to go towards the wall. You're basically trying to get that knee to touch the wall while keeping your full heel on the ground. And as soon as your heel lifts up off the ground, the test is considered a fail. So the measurement that you take is the last possible measurement of before your heel comes up off the ground. The best rule of thumb is if you can place, so if my foot, this is my foot, and my knee's driving in towards the wall, but the rule of thumb is if I can place my full hand between my foot, kind of big toe, and the wall, that would be considered a pass, kind of for that rule of thumb. You want 4.5 to 5 inches from the big toe to the wall is what you're measuring. Other things to kind of look for, what direction is my knee going? Is it going straight in towards the wall? Is it diving in a little bit more? Is it diving out a little bit more? Do I feel like I have to move my body around in order to get my knee to go forward? Little things that we're looking for in order for someone to achieve the motion. But overall, the rule of thumb is going to be from your big toe to the wall. If that is 4.5 inches or more, that is going to be a pass. The box strap test. So this is a big thing as far as what do we observe and what do we feel. Does the foot dive in too much? Are we able to maintain a really good foot position? What is our knee doing? What is our hip doing? What are we doing as far as upon that impact of the ground? So those are big components to look for. There's no actual measurements of this is a pass and this is a fail. It's kind of what are we doing and what are we feeling upon that impact. All right, we are going to do a quick crash course of anatomy. All right, there are a lot more muscles that are part of the ankle and the foot, but these are kind of your big players of kind of what we're going over today. So I'm going to do a kind of quick crash course on some of this stuff and keeping it pretty simple, not getting mixed up so much as far as what the names are of these muscles, but basically what do they do? Why are the muscles of our foot and our ankle and kind of that from the knee down, why are those important? To start off, we're going to go over the tibialis posterior, also nicknamed tib posterior, but that's a big arch supporter. It helps control our foot when we land or if we're pushing off side to side. It helps as far as like maintain the position of the foot so we're not going like this too much. When we go into what that's called as pronation, when we do that, we're going to create a little bit more torque and a little bit more stress on the knee, because if I'm diving in, the force is going to go up the chain into my knee. Something I don't want to take away from this is we need to train these individual muscles by themselves. Muscles work as a team, and they all work together. So it's kind of getting a lot of different components together to kind of do what we need them to do. So it's not like I'm going to go train my tib posterior today. It's I'm going to train my ankle today, and as far as get some good foot stability, get some good just like input to those muscles for them to be able to work together as a whole. So that's going to be on the back side. So it's one of your deeper muscles. Another deep muscle that we have is the tibialis anterior. So it's a little bit more in the front. What that does is it helps kind of lift your foot when you're walking, running, or even landing. So take the box drop test. Helps kind of maintain that foot when we're landing and have that load. If you've ever had shin splints, this is one that will typically bark at you a little bit more, because we're constantly requiring as far as that foot to be lifted. So like if you're power walking, I don't know if anyone's ever been late to a class while in college and they're just power walking across campus, and sometimes you get a little bit of front shin pain after. It's because we are trying to move so quickly and requiring that foot to stay up for longer periods of time, so it gets really fatigued and kind of pissed off. Then we're going to go on the back side, and we're going to go over our calf muscles. Those are kind of our bread and butter. We've got two of them, and they're sandwiched on top of each other, but they're called the gastrocnemius, or your gastroc, and the soleus. The too long didn't read version of them is they are your shock absorbers. That is their main thing outside of being able to push down that foot. They're activated when our toes go towards the ground. But they do absorb a lot of the force that we put on them, and they're bigger muscles of the lower extremity because they have a lot of impact placed on them. All right, then we're going to go to the outside of the ankle, called your peroneals. What they do is they bring your toes up and out. That's called eversion. They are key players in helping prevent you rolling your ankles, because when we roll our ankles, our foot kind of rolls down and in, and then those muscles become strained and affected and injured. So it helps kind of maintain that foot position and prevent this motion in general. So we want to keep them nice and strong in order to be able to take on situations of like if we do roll our ankle. We're going to go on to the outside of the ankle, focusing on muscles called your peroneals. What the peroneals do is, if this is my foot, it will make it go up and out into a position called eversion. Their big role is helping combat rolling the ankle. So rolling the ankle, a very typical way that we do that is going down and in, called inversion. An inversion ankle sprain is the most common way to injure your ankle and when you roll it. So it helps keep that foot stable to prevent kind of the impact of rolling the ankle. Not saying it doesn't happen, but it helps as far as like prevent that position or make you able to absorb that position without as much injury to that muscle. Then we've got our smaller muscles called our interossei. What that does is it more so controls your toes. So it goes out and in, and then also kind of flex and extends them. They are our deep muscle that lines along kind of the bottom of the foot. It helps control our toe motion, but also helps maintain that arch a little bit more. So it helps also just keep us contacted with the ground. A lot of the times I'll use the cue, put pressure underneath your big toe, little toe, and heel, and that helps maintain that foot a little bit better. And these muscles are key players into that position. Basically, what that cue does is prevent that foot from being all wobbly and wonky, especially under load. And so that's what these small little muscles do. All right, we have a ton of joints in our foot, but I only want to focus on a few of them, four specifically, because we do not need to go over all 33 plus of them. Specifically, why it is important to talk about the joints of the foot is because they help under load. They help us as far as be able to transfer force well. So specifically, if I am going from walking or I'm going to start running or I'm take off in a position, it is able to help me go push off a little bit better and a little bit more forcefully. And then also help stabilize that motion of your foot in general. So why we have so many is because our foot needs to be movable. If it's not movable, it's going to be really rigid and we're not going to be as pliable or be able to move as well, and then have a little bit more force generate up the chain and have more injuries due to that. So specifically, we are going to talk about your big toe, the ones kind of in the midfoot, your one that's kind of along that heel, and then basically where your shin and your ankle meet. So I know this is a lot of words on the slide, but if you want to pause and read, you're more than welcome. But we're going to go over those four areas that I've mentioned. So your first joint, the talocrural joint, this is where your shin and your ankle meet. Why it is important is because it is where, if I was going into dorsiflexion, my shin was going over my ankle, that is where this happens. We want that motion to be fluid. So tapping back to the knee against the wall test, that's what this is testing, this joint in particular. How much motion do you have at this joint? How much pressure do you feel at this joint? If it doesn't move well and it's really stiff, it's going to create some issues up the chain and also make some movements feel not so strong. So especially like when you're taking your first step to go running, or even going into a squat and something feels really locked up or even sharp, especially where that shin and the ankle meet, this is where that happens. So if I can't squat or move well, I want to dive into the squat because that is the easiest to apply here. But as soon as I require a lot of motion at that joint in my foot to be stable on the ground, if I don't have the proper motion that I need, I'm going to start to feel that lift of my heel and even fall a little bit more forward to be able to try to create more stability. And then on the back side, we have our subtalar joint. This is basically where your heel and the shin kind of meet on the back side. So I talked about earlier how your calves are your shock absorbers. So that's the muscle shock absorber. And then these are your joint shock absorber. What motion happens at this joint in particular is that pronation. So if you've ever heard the term like, I'm an overpronator, that's kind of where this motion is happening. So pronation is basically big toe towards the ground. Supination is going to be little toe towards the ground. And that's where this motion in particular happens. So if this is not moving as smoothly, you're not able to kind of like roll and glide, especially on the backside. So other areas, again, up the chain are going to be taking the brunt of this. And this one in particular is going to happen more so at the knee. All right, let's talk about the midfoot. I didn't want to name the very, very specific joints here because there's a few that go in here, but basically we're talking broadly, that mid area of the foot. This is where we're going to be a little bit more springy or need to be a little bit more springy because it is a kind of that transfer force as well. And so if it doesn't kind of spring as well, it's going to feel, you are going to have a little bit more altered motion, and it's not going to move as smoothly as you want. Due to the location of where these joints are in particular, it's going to provide stability both on the inside of the foot, kind of at that arch, but also on the outside of the foot. So it's kind of just basically where we put a lot of our pressure, so it needs to have that stable point. Think about it like a seesaw. Right in the middle is where that fulcrum point is, and that's exactly what's happening right here. Right, the last area I want to talk about is the forefoot, the very front of the foot, basically kind of like where the beginning of our toes are. It is really important for us to have motion here, specifically in your first toe, because it is our launch pad. If I do not have motion in my big toe, my motion is going to be altered. So we really want extension, so bringing that big toe up at our big toe, because of how when we're walking, when we're running, that's where our big fulcrum point is as far as being able to transfer that force. So if we don't have proper motion here, we're going to kind of feel it somewhere else. So we have a fascial component of the foot. Specifically, we're going to focus on the bottom side, your plantar fascia, which is known for creating some pain, inflammation. A lot of people have a case of plantar fasciitis. And there is a reason why that gets inflamed and irritated, which we'll go over here shortly. But the plantar fascia itself is, think of it like a power band. We want it to be able to be stiff and strong to help propel ourselves forward. And there's a mechanism in order to be able to achieve that. But it is a big component as far as conditions that we see or even feel for ourselves. And we'll go over that here shortly. But I wanted to do a quick little touch point on that, so we kind of have a little bit of a foundation. So a few drills that we're going to go over. I want you to think about these like mobility drills and passive drills, not so much our strength training drills that we'll go over later. This is to create more motion, more mobility, kind of loosen up the tissue to achieve those motions that we talked about earlier. Big toe mobilization. Tying back to what we had talked about earlier is how important our big toe is in being able to achieve that extension, especially when we are running or walking, so our gait moves smoothly and our big toe plays such a big role in that. So this is going to help mobilize it, especially if it's feeling kind of sticky, stuck, tight, all that. How I'm doing it here is with a lacrosse ball. If that motion feels too big, you can always drop down the ball size to like a golf ball or something smaller. It doesn't have to be as big as a lacrosse ball. But what I'm doing here is creating more motion at this joint in particular. Think about I'm driving this part of my big toe down towards the ground as I'm kind of leaning forward into the ball. So you'll see that kind of big stretch through this motion, this position here, and then I come off of it. So we want to hold for a few seconds, lean into it, come back off. So everything is happening right through that joint to get that passive extension that we tend to do as we're walking or running. What I would do is accumulate up to 2 minutes of this. Don't really need anything more than that, but it's just to focus on kind of just getting that mobilization through there. And it should be relatively passive, so you can do this while watching TV or before you warm up for the day before your workout, or even at home after your workout. All right, we're going to go over that dorsiflexion, how to achieve it kind of with some mobility tools. So if you didn't feel like you could get very far away from the wall during that dorsiflexion test, this can be a really good exercise to kind of help with that, especially during a warm-up. I love to do these before I do squats or anything where I have like high volume squats. Even also before I go for, if like my workout has a longer run in it, this can be really helpful because sometimes I get that kind of like pinching pain right in that joint we talked about earlier where the shin and the ankle meet. So I would do a thick band. We want a thicker band because the idea of it is it's pulling down at an angle right through that foot as your shin moves around it. So it's kind of that glide component to achieve more passive dorsiflexion. I like this to be done on a box or an elevated surface because I feel like the angle is a little bit more favorable compared to when I do this on the ground. And sometimes I feel like it feels like a way better stretch up on a box. You can use your hand to push down on your knee, or you can use a weight to also help get a little bit more pressure through that joint itself as you move through. So I would hold for a few seconds at the top of the motion and then back off of it. You'll see Chase use a weight too to kind of help with a little bit more of that pressure point. It helps again. So I would approach this the same way that you do the test. You don't want your heel to come up off the box or off the ground as you do it. And then I would hang out for a few seconds and then pop off of it, accumulating either 10 reps or about 2 minutes. And it should feel pretty good, like a pretty good stretch through that part of the ankle. You might get a little bit of an extra stretch through the bottom of the foot, and that's very, very normal. But it's just kind of stretching that whole line. All right, tack and floss. There's a few ways to do this. But the idea is looking for trigger points, because we're going to kind of pin and stretch them to help kind of those trigger points release a little bit more. And this is a way to kind of do it yourself, especially if your calves are feeling a little tight. There's no wrong way to really do this. You're just looking for spots that feel a little bit more spicy up into that calf. If your calves feel a little bit more tight, I would start on a foam roller. But if they're feeling good and you really want to get in there, you can also do a kettlebell, which Chase will demonstrate. But you want to kind of point and plantar flex, dorsiflex that foot up and down as you find that trigger point. You can control how much weight that you put on it, but basically we're just trying to work that tissue that feels tight and uncomfortable. But the main thing with this is not just kind of like rolling up and down on it. It's being intentional with those trigger points and trying to get those to release and feel a little bit better. All right, we're going to talk about plantar fasciitis. Most people have either heard of it, know someone with it, or even had it themselves. What happens is the bottom of the foot becomes really inflamed or irritated because the calf muscles aren't doing what they need to do. They are not being proper shock absorbers, so the thing that's getting overloaded is going to be the plantar fascia or the bottom of the foot. Typical telltale signs, every case presents a little bit differently, but like textbook cases of plantar fasciitis is usually you get pretty pinpoint pain right on the heel. And it feels like that's it. It doesn't go anywhere else. It just right here. And then you have kind of that residual tightness up and down the foot. So when our calves aren't pulling the weight and doing what they need to, your plantar fascia in the bottom of the foot is going to be hounded on a little bit more. So what we usually want to do is, because it feels tight, we want to roll it out with like a lacrosse ball or a frozen water bottle, and that only provides temporary relief. It's because it's not the fascial problem, it is a muscular problem, and it's usually a strength issue because there's a compensation. Okay. We've touched on this a few times, but I just kind of wanted a slide to specifically go over all the motions of the foot. But we've got plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, pronation, supination. Then we've got eversion, just going up and out, and inversion going up and in. Basically how the foot moves around the axis. All right, I briefly mentioned this as we were going over the plantar fascia, but also the importance of the big toe motion. This also demonstrates the importance of like how we need our plantar fascia to be tight and rigid, because it is that power band, and it is advantageous for us to be a little bit more explosive as we kind of propel ourselves forward. So basically, as we're like pushing off or propelling ourselves forward, our big toe needs to extend, and it needs to have that pretty, you want to have a good amount of extension through that big toe. When that happens, the plantar fascia that lines the bottom of the foot becomes it becomes more taut and also more rigid, which helps at the end of the day generate even more power or explosiveness. So as we kind of extend through there and then push off, it helps kind of explode forward a little bit more. So it helps kind of that foot motion, and just demonstrates the importance of rigidity of the foot. If we don't have that rigidity, then it's going to get hounded on a little bit more, and then not only will we have issues at the bottom of our foot, but also in the calf and some other places along the ankle. All right, our active drills. So these are the ones that we're building some strength, but then also we're going to go over some plyos, because plyometrics are really important as we get older, but also to build the strength of our tendons and make them a little bit more resilient. All right, first exercise. So first exercise, called short foot. What it's doing is those smaller muscles that support the bottom of your foot, this is what it's working. Helps with the arch, helps with kind of being able to maintain load throughout that foot, helps with that foot tripod I've mentioned a few times, but it is important to help keeping our feet strong. The fun one about this one is if you've never done it before and then you start doing it a little bit more regularly, it makes that bottom of the foot more sore than we anticipate, because we're working those small muscles and it's like, what did I do? Why is this so sore? But with time it feels a little bit better. So basically what we want to think about with this exercise is we're creating a puff up of that arch while also maintaining pressure underneath our big toe, little toe, and heel. So that foot control. So think about someone is pulling a string from the midfoot up to create a little bit of like puffing of that arch, or even coming and trying to squish that ankle together, but you're not clawing at the ground as you're doing it. So it's very, very subtle, but can be quite effective, especially to help with more stability. Then one of my personal favorites, I call this the sprinter iso, because it feels like you're falling forward to go sprint. So you're falling into the wall for the starting position. We want to maintain contact of the foot underneath the big toe and the little toe, and the heel is coming up. We want to focus on that heel coming up so it focuses on that calf isometrics. And also, as you do this, you're going to feel this all along the posterior chain, whether with a weight or without a weight. What it helps with too is that triple extension position that we usually achieve when we're cleaning a barbell or going into a snatch. We want that full, like, toes up, heels up, fully extended position, and that can also help with this as well. We're not creating movement with this one. We're just holding in a position. And so if you can see, as far as like this pause, you can see how much that my calf muscles are working, especially with a load here, that we're maintaining that position and getting that foot and ankle to work really hard, but also doing an isometric to the muscle to help kind of make it stronger as well. So you can do it with load or you can do it without load, but you want to maintain that position as you kind of fall forward, but keep that hinge. So it's not the chest falling forward and you're not trying to like squat down as much as you can. You want that load. So think about belly button is behind the knee, chest is in front of the knee. Then to work a little bit more of the balance and also still posterior chain, the full foot is going to be contacted on the ground. We're going to go for a single leg RDL. We can do this unweighted or weighted. Weighted is going to be a little bit more input to the muscles themselves, but you want to maintain that foot tripod position. So put pressure underneath your big toe, your little toe, and your heel, and that's also going to help with balance. This one is going to challenge where your body is in space, so you want to have that good foundation as we progress. You can do it supported or you can do it unsupported. So supported is with my back foot kind of being like a kickstand, but you're still getting that hinge through the hips. And I want you to think about this as my knee position isn't changing. It's just kind of like my upper body that's changing a little bit more, but from here down should all essentially stay the same. So you're reaching back and then pushing the ground, or pushing your foot into the ground as if you're trying to make a footprint as you come up. And then you can do it unsupported without, to make it a little bit more challenging, but your hips have to stay forward the whole time. Almost think about, you have little laser beams on the front of the hips as you go down. And so you have to maintain that balance as you go and maintain that rigidity. All right, plyometrics are basically creating more springiness to your joints. As we get older, we don't really do this anymore. We don't skip, we don't really hop, we don't play hopscotch and kind of jump on one leg. But that's even more important as we get older, because we're giving input to those tendons to be and exposing them to those positions and making them stronger through some of this stuff. We want to create those positive adaptations of the joints and of your tendons and muscles. So it's through the mindset of injury prevention. We want to be able to absorb force that we put on our joints and not be crumbled by them when we push them past something that it's been exposed to. So this gives the opportunity to expose ourselves to those positions. So to summarize, plyometrics help you become a little bit more springy, create proper stiffness in the foot in order to help kind of like propel you forward or be able to take on the impact, and especially like recoil efficiently out of impact and decrease injury. Or I should say it helps decrease potential for injury. So we're exposing them to things that we are naturally not exposed to on a regular basis. But if we can basically make them nice and powerful and built to last, call out to the Ford truck, then our injury rate will hopefully decrease by exposing them to these positions. And we want to make our tendons nice and strong because no one wants to deal with an Achilles tear or ongoing plantar fasciitis that won't go away. Injury happens when we place a lot of force or a lot of demand on tissues that have not been exposed to those positions, and it far exceeds it, and then it leads to injury. So basically exposing our tissue to things that we're not exposed to on a regular basis and ease ourselves into it over time can just make us stronger, faster, and more efficient. So a few different plyometrics to start off with. The pogos are just for that reactive stiffness and quick positions. You can do this with also a band tied onto the rig, so you have a little bit more support if this feels a little too intense to do without. You want to expose them quickly to both legs and then single legs, and then also just different positions and different planes of motion. You want to do a lot of reps of these so you have that like quick recoil. I would do at least 20 at a time. It will probably go down as you do the single leg and makes it a little bit hard, and it might be not as quick, but with time it will become a little bit quicker, but working on that explosive power of the foot. So we do it in place and then we do it side to side. The last one of like the in and out is going to be the hardest, but it exposes to an entirely different position of also involving the hip and the knee in that full chain and doing kind of that quick motion. I like to start with, as I do it with my hands, mirroring my ankles, and then you can do it really slowly. So going in and then out, in, out, and then you get faster as you go. Then the 45-degree hops. Why it is important to go at 45 degrees is it shows a different plane of motion than we're used to, especially when it comes to CrossFit. And then how often do we even hop at 45 degrees? It also tests the outside stability of your ankle and how you absorb force upon that landing, because it is very different than going forward compared to how your body reacts at a 45-degree angle. You want to maintain control as you land, and we don't want a ton of hops in place to provide that stability. We want to be able to get quick with it as we go. Then a box to broad jump. So we're starting on a box, so you can't forcefully like rock back and then go into it. You have to kind of start forward, and it also changes your landing a little bit. What do you use to propel yourself forward? And especially, what do you do on that second hop? The reason why we do two is that reactivity, and then also seeing how you go from one thing or one hop to the next. And are you able to, like, which hop do you get farther in, or which one feels better with the landing? Are you quick with it? Are you slow with it? Are you a little bit more straight-legged when you land on the first one and a little bit more energy absorbing on the second one? But we really want to land a little bit more in that squat on that second one, and we want to do a pause. So it's also working that triple extension we talked about earlier. We want to be strong as far as being able to get our hips forward to bring us farther down the gym. I wanted to touch on the difference between pain and injury a little bit. We, anytime we feel pain, sometimes we're like, oh my gosh, it's injured, I've done something. But they do not equal each other. Sometimes we can feel a little discomfort as far as like a warning sign of, okay, something's wrong, or especially if it persists. But we're not actually fully damaging the tissue every time there's pain. When it comes to the rehab exercises, sometimes when we first jump into it, it can feel a little spicy and a little like, is this hurting? What are we feeling? This feels a little uncomfortable. We usually want to give it a few rounds or a few reps to see if that changes. We have a green light when, okay, as I'm holding this position or doing this exercise, it feels better as I go. That's great. That means we need a little bit more input into that area, and it's creating improvement as we go. But just know the first time when we jump into some of these at first, they can feel really crappy and almost sometimes painful, but then we look for improvement. So, and I tapped on this earlier of we become injured when we don't expose ourselves to different positions. So the demand that we place on that muscle or that tissue exceeds what it actually can handle. And so we want to put tools in our toolkit to be able to like gently expose and gradually expose ourselves to different positions so it doesn't lead to injury. And our body is kind of like ready for those quick changes. Our body is ready for like, if I need to like plant and run the other direction. That's where a lot of this stuff goes. And same thing, like that's why the importance of plyometrics are like sometimes quick change of direction can be really, really good as far as that exposure goes. So we usually equate pain to being negative, but it shouldn't always be observed that way as far as like what is our intention behind why we're doing an exercise or why we're doing something. I would say good rule of thumb is if we're feeling pain for a period of time, like a week or so, and it's not going away, even if we've tried some different interventions, that's when it's time to kind of get it evaluated and see kind of what's going on. And it's usually like a few things that we can do in order to kind of help clear it up, whether it's tissue work, whether it's rehab, and seeing kind of what direction to go with that. We don't want to kind of be like, oh, I'll take care of that later. And then it just becomes like a bigger and bigger issue to the point of like, oh, I can't do pull-ups anymore, or I can't do squats anymore, or I can't do heavy squats. You want to get ahead of it before it gets worse, so then you can kind of continue doing the activities that you love. This would be a great opportunity to redo those tests again. See what you did at the beginning. Spend some time doing those exercises. It doesn't need to all be at once because you're probably not going to create much of a change. I would look over at a period of like a few weeks, retest in about a month after you've done some of this stuff consistently and see if it changes anything at all. And definitely in your notes app on your phone, see and make a note of, oh, I only got 20 single leg calf raises, did this stuff for about a month, and now I can do 30. It's just kind of fun to see as far as like what you got versus progressions over time. If you have any questions whatsoever, please shoot me an email. Come and find me at the gym. Come and say hey. I'm happy to talk this stuff. I will nerd out on it anytime. So if there's something that's been persisting and not really going away, or even if you're like, hey, how do I do this exercise again? Just come and grab me, and I'm happy to chat it through. Hope you guys learned something, took one little nugget away from this. But yeah, looking forward to teaching more. And I'll see you next time.